Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Am I broadcasting? Yes or no? Yes, okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is Stephen Weitzman, and I'm here as the director of the Tobey Center for Jewish Studies at Stanford. And I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. In a few weeks' time, Jews will be coming together on the holiday of Passover to recount the Exodus, the story of how their ancestors escaped a life of slavery in Egypt for a better life, or at least for a freer one. To recount that story, Jews read from a text known as the Haggadah, a kind of script that not only recounts the Exodus, but tries to make it come alive through dinner table drama that involves props, dialogue, and many, many characters. The Exodus story may well be the oldest continuously told story in the world, and as every generation tells it yet again, it faces a question of what this ancient story means to them, of what their own personal stake is in its narrative. We are privileged tonight to be able to engage that question ourselves with the help of some of our generation's leading storytellers. Before we introduce our guest, however, I have a few small requests and a thank you or two to give. First of all, we know from archaeology that the ancient Israelites did not at any point during the Exodus have access to cell phones. So to honor their sacrifice, I'm going to ask you to turn off your cell phones. I want to also note that the program tonight, which should probably end 75 minutes or 90 minutes from now, will be followed by a book signing, which will be upstairs on the third floor of this same building in room N302. And there will be student ushers who will be kind of leading the way. And you'll exit out the doors that you came in, and if you want to buy a book and have it signed, you will find a stairwell to the left and an elevator to the left, and you can take those up to the third floor. However, I want to please ask you to just, when the program ends, wait a few minutes so that we can have our guests exit first and get to that room first. I also want to warn you that there's a limited number of books. They've already kind of sold out nationally, so if there are not enough books for you all, I apologize in advance. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to a number of people, beginning with my staff in the Tobey Center for all their hard work in making this happen, along with a number of staff members and student volunteers from Hillel, which is a co-sponsor of this event. So can you please join me in thanking them for what they've done? I'd also like to thank two co-sponsors of tonight's evening, the Division of Literatures, Cultures, and Languages, and also the American Studies program. So we're really thankful for their support of this event as well. Introducing our guest this evening is a wonderful colleague of mine, Professor Gabriella Safran, who is the chair of the director of Stanford's Division of Literatures, Cultures, and Languages, and I'd like to ask her to come up now to introduce our guest. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to have the chance to introduce the people who produced the new American Haggadah. As a literature professor, I love Passover, the Seder, the idea that literature seminars are part of Jewish ritual, that once a year or twice in the United States, we are obligated to spend a leisurely evening going through a story, telling it, singing it, talking about it, turning it one way and another, figuring out why it matters to us, continuing a conversation that began before we were born and will continue after we are gone, a conversation that includes people we already know and unexpected guests whom we are meeting for the first time. I have, it would appear, 3 people to introduce and an empty chair, which we must assume is for Elijah the prophet, the expected and unexpected guest at every Passover Seder. I will begin by introducing Jonathan Safran Foer. People ask all the time if we're related, and the answer is yes, unexpectedly, because of the Foers, not the Safrans. Jonathan is a fantastically talented fiction writer, the author of Everything is Illuminated, 2002, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, 2005, Eating Animals, 2009, and Tree of Codes in 2010. Everything is Illuminated is the story of an American teenager who goes to Ukraine to learn about his family's history. There, he meets and employs a Ukrainian teenager whom Foer endows with an incredible, funny, mistranslated voice. He plays with language and reality and history. He cares about what really happened, except when he doesn't. The movie based on Everything is Illuminated stars Elijah Wood and Eugene Hutz, the lead singer of the New York Ukrainian gypsy punk band Gogol Bordello. And what's amazing to me is the way that Jonathan, just out of college at that point, wrote this book about Ukraine, and Eugene Hutz from Ukraine answered with his own crazy kinetic energy, becoming an unexpected guest at Jonathan's Passover Seder. The next person I get to introduce is Nathan Englander, another brilliant young fiction writer, the author of the short story collection For the Relief of Unbearable Urges, 1999, the novel The Ministry of Special Cases, 2007, about Jews, whores, the disappeared, Argentina, and the new short story collection, What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank. Even though he wrote it in English, I teach Englander's story, his brilliant story, The 27th Man, in my class on the Yiddish short story, right after I teach Moshe Nadir's The Man Who Slept Through the End of the World. Englander's story about the Night of the Murdered Poets in 1952, when Stalin had 13 Soviet Yiddish writers shot in jail. I teach this story by Englander because Englander has the confidence, the chutzpah, to answer the Yiddish writers in English, to pick up the Yiddish stories that we have now and to turn them one way and another, to carry on these stories and this tradition in an unexpected direction, to become the unexpected guest at a Yiddish Passover Seder. Last, I get to introduce my friend, Nathaniel Deutsch, who had to run out here. He wanted to hear what I would say. Listen, Nathaniel. Professor of Literature and History at UC Santa Cruz, Director of the Center for Jewish Studies there. Nathaniel, I think, makes being a Jewish studies scholar seem somehow a little more thrilling than the rest of us experience it on a daily basis. He writes books about mysticism, about Jews and African Americans, about a female mystic from Ukraine, and most recently he wrote The Jewish Dark Continent, Life and Death in the Jewish Pale of Settlement, about S. Onsky, the mutual obsession of me and Nathaniel, an early 20th century Russian and Yiddish writer, revolutionary and ethnographer, who, like Jonathan Safran Foer would a century later, traveled through Ukraine, looking for traces of the Jewish past, gathering voices and impressions, hoping to create something new. This book it's a fantastic book, and it shows us how a century ago, just like today, people were studying the Jewish tradition, manipulating it, turning it this way and that, trying to find a place for themselves at the table and in the conversation. Together, these three people, whom you are expecting to see and hear, have produced the new American Haggadah, the subject of today's discussion. But they are not the only people who contributed to it. It includes many voices. Jonathan Safran Foer edited it, Nathan Englander translated it elegantly, Nathaniel Deutsch wrote some of the commentary, others too wrote for it. The philosopher and novelist Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein, the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, Stanford PhD Mia Bruch, and the mysterious pseudonymous San Francisco writer Daniel Handler, also known as Lemony Snicket, has written some of the commentary. He is known, Handler or Snicket, is known for writing the literary novels The Basic Eight, Watch Your Mouth, and Adverbs, and under the name Lemony Snicket, he's also written a best-selling sequence of books for children, 13 books known as A Series of Unfortunate Events. He is now working on a 4th book for adults and a new series for children entitled All the Wrong Questions. Very appropriate for Passover. His work mixes steampunk aesthetics, absurdity in the tradition of Lewis Carroll, and an effervescent joy in language, along with great inserted definitions of the hard words. All our writers, I think, are connected by the way that they embrace cultural retrieval as itself an artistic act. These writers are not trying to salvage the past because they know the past does not need us to salvage it. Rather, these writers embrace the fragmentary nature of the past. They accept that when you go back, when you go back to the past and look, you find something. Not what you wanted, not what you expected, but something. It's not the key to something. It's not yourself. You don't find yourself. But you find something, and you take that something that you have found, you turn it this way and that, and eventually something unexpected, something that matters, comes into view. And the next day you find something else that also matters. This, I think, is the spirit of the New American Haggadah. And as I was looking at it, I realized that you physically have to turn it in different ways to read it. Some of it you read this way, and some you read this way, and some you read this way. And maybe there's some I haven't figured out that you read this way. You read it, and something that matters comes into view. And the next day or the next year, something else that matters comes into view. I can't wait to use it at this year's Seder. Let us welcome our guests.
You jumped the gun.
Howdy. I've got 2 requests. If we could see, if everyone could pretend I'm also wearing a blazer. I have 2 in my hotel room, so just pretend I'm wearing one. This is my dress. It has buttons for me. It's like a tuxedo. And the other thing I wanted to announce is, heard a reference to our Elijah seat, but we actually don't want to keep it empty because it's not Pesach yet, and it would be a shanda to leave an empty chair here. So we have a special guest, and we'd like to introduce him. I guess me being I. But Daniel Handler, a.k.a. Lemony Snicket, is going to be our... That's the last surprise. Reach under your chairs.
Or is it?
Exactly. Everybody gets a car.
Well, I want to start by thanking everyone for coming tonight.
Yeah, that's loud.
And I want to begin with a few facts about Haggadahs. The first one is from 1595 in Mantua, Italy, which was one of the first sites of Jewish printing. And one of the things that Jews had to do in Mantua is submit lists of books, Jewish books, to the censor to be approved. And from those lists, we can see that over 35% of all the books that were submitted were Haggadahs. And the only books that were greater than that or even competed with it were the Bible and the prayer book, the Siddur. So that's the first fact. The second one is that over 5,000, perhaps as many as 7,000 different versions of the Haggadah have been produced over the years, including over 50 million copies of the Maxwell House Haggadah in print, which would be 10 for every Jew in the United States, which is an extraordinary figure. So my question is, what is it about the Haggadah that is so compelling? What has made it so compelling over the centuries?
I think there are a lot of ways to think about that. One is what makes its function so compelling, what makes Passover so compelling. Another is what makes the book itself compelling. And finally, what makes the book, what about the book seems to invite visitations, new additions. So one of the things that I really loved about this book, and I came to love it more and more the more time I spent with it, was that really from whatever perspective you take, however you engage with it, and in my case, there were a number of different perspectives. I engaged with it as a storyteller. I engaged with it as somebody who's interested in language. I engaged with it as a Jew. I engaged with it as somebody who's attended Seders for 35 years. And I engaged with it as somebody who, in the very near future, will be hosting Seders, something that I've never done before. And from each of those perspectives, it's just it proved itself to be really an infinitely rich document. You know, the more you ask of it, the more it offers up to you. It's not a coincidence that of all books ever written, this is the one that has had the most revisions or additions made up. Or that the story is so well known across cultures, or so often borrowed by different cultures, particularly social justice movements. It's just such a compelling and open story. I think that it invites borrowing. I mean, in a way, the whole point of the Haggadah, the whole point of the Seder is this act of empathy, this idea that you should not only receive the story but be a character within it, that you are supposed to yourself feel as if you were liberated from Egypt. And it makes itself available to that. Just as it made itself available to the civil rights movement, in the United States. It creates an awful lot of room, and that was something we thought about, all of us, when putting this book together, is how to expand that room rather than contract it.
Do you want to add, either of you want to add anything to that? Or?
No.
Comment.
No comment, okay, great.
I'm still getting over the fact that you've never hosted a Seder. That seems weird to me.
I attend Seders. I attend them. You don't
want anyone to come over to your house?
Exactly.
Here's the problem, is that
Tell me the problem.
my family lives in D.C. and I live in New York, and I'm the only member of my family that doesn't live in D.C. So to ask everybody to come to New York is extreme, especially my grandmother, who is only barely ambulatory. So,
But you're doing it this year.
Well, in fact, that was a little bit of a fib. I'm actually not doing it this year. We're going away this year. I will probably do it the next year or two because the family is dispersed a little bit. It's a long story. It's not worth getting into. But, times
It's none of my
change.
business, actually, but I just got curious about it.
Also,
as long
I
as
have
we're
kids.
alone, we might as well.
Yeah, exactly. It'll go no further than this room.
So the next question I have actually comes from my wife's grandmother. And she is old enough, she was born in Shtetl, and she's old enough to remember a pogrom that occurred in her shtetl in 1914. So she's seen a lot of these versions of the Haggadah come out in the intervening century. And when she found out that I had contributed to a Haggadah, to a Haggadah, her question was, why another Haggadah? And so I want to rephrase that. Why did you do?
Jewish grandmother response, rather than, I'm awfully proud of you,
She also, before that, she asked me how much money I got paid.
Are there? Yeah.
So I want to rephrase that somewhat. I want to ask you why you decided to do Haggadah. When did you decide? And I want to, maybe you can begin to talk about the process of how the Haggadah came into being.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember a specific moment when I decided. I do remember that throughout my childhood and up through the last Seder, I've always felt some disappointment with the Seder. I don't mean that they always were memorable. They always created good feeling. I feel nostalgic for the smells and sounds of them. I look forward to them every year. But it's not enough for it to be a pretty nice night, to my mind, or at least there's something much more that could happen. It's exactly one time or two times consecutive Seders, 2 times a year, that my family, and I imagine most people's families here, gather to sit around a table and discuss the very biggest themes. What is slavery? What is freedom? What are the obligations of free people to slaves? Who are we as individuals, as a family, as a people? How can we move ourselves closer to the people that we imagined being, and move our world closer to this metaphorical Jerusalem that we speak about at the end of the Seder? So it should be a great night, and this book should be a great book. It really invites thought and creativity. The images are so resonant. There's just no reason it shouldn't be the finest book. And what I found is that in my family, when we would say, and we went through lots of Haggadahs. We would try lots of different ones. My parents sometimes cobbled them together. We used the Maxwell House sometimes. And when we would pick up a new one, we'd say, oh, you know, this one looks pretty good. And what we meant was relative to others that we've used, this one looks pretty good. And when we would read it, we'd say, this translation's not bad, but we meant relative to others. And so why would others be our standard instead of, you know, the very best writing that we read in the course of a year, or the very best art and design that we look at? There's just no reason. There's every reason that the book should be intellectually and aesthetically ambitious. So I had this idea that many, many, many people have had, which is maybe I would try to make another. You know, wherever there have been Jews, there have been new
And when did you have that idea? When did it first enter your mind?
I can't. The only thing I can pinpoint is the first time I acted on the idea,
Yeah.
which was 9 years ago. I sent an email to Adam Gopnik, a writer at The New Yorker, and I said, hey, I have this idea of making a new Haggadah. Is that something you might be interested in thinking about?
And how did it get from, why did it take 9 years? I mean,
And why isn't Adam Gopnik on the
yeah,
stage tonight?
indeed.
Why did it take 9 years? Well,
He's really slow with email.
yeah,
So
it was dial-up. There is, I mean, talk about a book where there's no rush. You know, this is it. Many, many, many times, Nathan and I would say, probably get it done next year.
Yeah, I was going to say, for years, people would
Yeah.
ask, and they say, you know, is it going to be out for Passover? And for years, we've been, you know, I said, unless it comes out on Seder night, it will be before some Passover. So we finally beat one.
It took a lot of time because it had to find the right form. You know, when I started working on it, I thought I would just assemble the best writing and the best art, and that would make the best Haggadah. And as I started to work, it became clear that that wasn't true. It made a really nice anthology, or a really nice reference book, but it didn't make a good functioning Haggadah to be read at the table and you know, lead us not only through these ritualistic activities, but to these important questions. So at one point there were, I think, 30 contributors. And I mean, really, really, people I was so excited to work with, but it wasn't shaping up. I was working toward a book that wasn't my ambition. So I ended up contracting the structure, really through conversations with you, to these 4 voices commenting on these 10 sort of pivotal moments in the Seder, the moments when most families pause and say, all right, what's going on here? You know, moments everybody's familiar with, not just Jews. 10 plagues, and so on, 4 sons. So the writing of the commentaries, the translation took a long time, but they took a small fraction of the total project's length, because really it was about wrestling with form.
And why did you decide to ask Nathan to translate the Haggadah?
I just thought he would do the best job. You know, I thought about the kind of natural choices, the people you might expect, the kinds of people who have translated often very, very beautifully Hebrew literature, poetry, or liturgy. But there were 2 things that I really wanted. One was a translation that captured the lyricism and beauty and intentional ambiguity and resonance of the text, but also one that captured the moral force of the text. And, you know, Nathan is a fiction writer. He's not a philosopher. He's not a political writer. But it's amazing how often in reviews people mention the moral force of his stories. And I think they're right to. And that particular combination seemed not only fitting, but really, really exciting.
So Nathan, I want to ask you something about the process of the translation, but
Sure.
before I do that, if you wouldn't mind reading something from the Haggadah.
Oh, I happen to
Oh,
have
wow.
one right here.
That's great.
I always say, it's that talk show moment, my banjo. So yeah, I'm going to read, this is, you're going to miss the good part. Anyway, but I'm going to read from, it's the Hallel section.
Anti-Semitism, what else could it be?
Exactly. Right. My thing said bingo night.
Poor guy probably has to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, this is the Hallel. We say the Hallel plenty of times. It's not just on Pesach. We say it on a lot of holidays and things. How much do I sound not like a philosopher when I say that? Anyway, but Hallel's a really, it's a joyous kind of prayer. And this is from Nishmat Kol Chai, which is especially beautiful. It's known to be a beautiful text. So I was going to say, any beauty you find is from the original. But I thought I'd read you a little section of that to let you hear it in your ears. Let the spirit of all life bless your name, Lord God of us, and the breath of all flesh glorify and extol our remembrance of you, our eternal King. From infinity and to infinity, you are God. And without you, we have no king to redeem and deliver, to ransom and rescue, to provide and be compassionate through every period of difficulty and distress. We have no king but you, God of the first and the last, God of all creations, master of all generations, who is praised with an abundance of venerations, who pilots his world with beneficence and his creations with compassion. And the Lord does not drowse and does not sleep. He is the one who wakes sleepers and rouses those under the spell of slumber, who gives voice to the mute and unbinds the bound, embraces the falling and straightens the bent. It is to you alone, that we are thankful. Were our mouths filled with a singing like the sea, and our tongues awash with song as waves countless, and our lips lauding as the skies are wide, and our eyes illumined like the sun and the moon, and our hands spread out like the eagles of heaven, and our feet as fleet as fawns. Still, we would not suffice in thanking you, Lord God of us and God of our fathers, in blessing your name for even one of 1,000,000 from the thousands of thousands and the 10,000s of 10,000s of times you did good turns for our fathers and for us.
So Nathan, I want to read a quote from an essay by the German Jewish critic Walter Benjamin. It's called The Task of the Translator. The task of the translator consists in finding that intended effect upon the language into which he is translating, which produces in it the language of the original. And then he goes on to quote someone else named Rudolf Panwitz approvingly. Quote, our translations, even the best ones, proceed from a wrong premise. They want to turn Hindi, Greek, English into German instead of turning German into Hindi, Greek, English. So I wonder if you could talk about what you saw as your task as a translator and the relationship of the Hebrew original and Aramaic, Hebrew and Aramaic original to English.
I was going to say, it's so nice to sit up here. I'll do 94 hours now on the love of physical books, but there's something about finishing, those of us who make books, I can't even believe we're sitting here with the book. It's such a nice thing to be on this side of it, after all that goes into it. But when Jonathan came to me, I just literally had I always say it was simply the loveliest and worst idea to come to me. I just liked, it's very strange to be part of his idea of the book, but I don't identify as a translator, I had no experience. For the literary people out here, the only translator I like the Constant Garnett translations of Dostoevsky and stuff. Those are fine with me, thanks. But you know what I'm saying? But just this idea of thinking what it's about and starting to find voice. I can't say enough, and I love this idea, and we can talk. We will talk about Oded Ezer's brilliant design, but an idea that Jonathan had that I love. This idea of this band that falls off. This is not our book. I like the idea that our names are supposed to fall out. Back to the 7,000 editions and stuff. This is everyone's text. It is surely not my text. And it was back to doing justice and different than finding a voice. We talked about. I love that quote. You just said it made me think of Salman Rushdie after Midnight's Children. Why Midnight's Children, which is still a great book, but why it sort of shook people up was even translating sort of the feel of Hindi into where we talk about Heblish and Hinglish and all these how language forms. But it takes me back to I've just been on tour for the collection, and it makes me think. I haven't told this is all forming right now in front of you. Watch me think. But it's funny. I had to learn to translate my own fiction. Actually, I haven't thought about this at all in relation to the Haggadah, but I always talk about it with fiction, which I studied with the wonderful and brilliant Marilyn Robinson when I was out at Iowa, and she sort of changed my life. You can't teach voice and all this stuff. You can teach people a lot. But I was right. I grew up religious and went to yeshiva, and that's the rhythms. I'm fourth or fifth generation American, but I spent all day morning till night with these sort of old country or Brooklyn country rabbis. In all my early stories, I write everything in Yiddish. That's, you hear there are rhythms even in English. That's the point is I translate English to English when I write. I write everything in Yiddish. My first sentence will be like, I should wait here all day for you to show up 5 minutes late while I'm busy. That's how my sentences come out. And then Marilyn taught me that that's actually Yiddish. And when I write, that's the voice I hear. I still write that way, and then I translate it and I keep it when necessary. But back to this, I can't even tell you what convinced me to write this translation is when Jonathan I'd never really interacted with English, and I looked at this, basically the Havdalah, Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'chol, Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'Kodesh is the line that I'm thinking of. To differentiate, it's often translated, or pretty much always translated as between the Sabbath and the holiday, which is what it means. That's what the line means. It's clear, that's a great translation. Clear, concise, has the meaning, what's intended, but we have the word, it's in the book. The word for Shabbat is in there, and the word for Chag and Yom, the word for Sabbath is in there, and the word for holiday is in there, and the sentence is to differentiate between holy and holy. And I thought, wow, someone has translated the meaning out of this sentence, because that is its intent, is to mark the difference between these 2 days. But my God, like the metaphysical, the gigantic space, the gap, either tiny or infinite, what is the space between holy and holy? I just couldn't understand that someone would undo this giant this is a book about discussion, and someone had removed what you could talk all night about that, and that's only on Saturday night before you start. So I really started to think, I really believe this text that you should read it and weep. It is so deeply moving to me, and I say this as a secular person, just it is a beautiful, powerful, overwhelming text, and I understood, it's the first time, and I thank Jonathan for this, it's the first time I understood. I just never thought about it. I always think I'm a terrible explainer of games. Nobody lets me give directions because I assume everyone has all the knowledge that I have. And I start there and then I go off to the side, But the point is I just never understood that what I'm hearing in my head, maybe everybody's not hearing. And my whole task, the same as when you're writing fiction, you're just supposed to, a story doesn't get written, I hope everyone will back me up, is when you fall away. Like you're not being the characters, you're not writing. You're writing maybe all morning, maybe you get up early and you write all day and you're writing. That's not when the work gets done. There's a moment where you fall away and you are the story and you are inside the story, and that's so translated to translation was my obligation is to the text as a whole. That's it.
So, you mentioned when you write your fiction, you're sitting there alone.
Yes.
But in this case, when you were translating,
we have been worried about the giggles for days.
I don't know what prompted that, but there was somebody else there. In other words,
yes.
you had a chavruta.
Neisman Hashemayim. This is like you all know Bashert, like when things are meant to be. My Bashert is this guy named Baruch Thaler who's not here tonight. But there's two. I actually just found out that Oded and I used to work in the same place, the designer, which is crazy. But when I used to have long hair when I was a young woman, but back in my medieval times, but I used to be, when my first book came out, people come up to me, in my coffee shop when I was writing and say, you're that guy, I read this story, often offering opinions, sometimes full reviews to you, which is always kindly. So they usually say like, oh yeah, if you've read my stuff, there's Jews in it. So you'll be like, they'll say like, I was really religious, and then they say like, I rented Yentl, or I had a piece of matzah. Like they have this connection. But this guy came up to me looking very hippie-esque and artsy and alternative. And he said, oh yeah, I used to be religious. And then he started talking to me. This is like 10 years ago. Probably, I'll declare it was the day Jonathan got the idea for the Haggadah. We'll make it really mystical. But the point is, he said to me, he started talking and I recognized I was in the presence of honestly one of the great minds that I've ever been, it was fantastic what this guy was talking about. And when I roughed out this translation, working on this book, and then I understood I'm a secular person, and I really started to think about the obligation in this translation. It's a very strange thing to start your first translation test to be, let's start with Genesis. Like it's overwhelming, and I understood that people who are using the English side are going to be praying to God, are going to be having a religious experience with the words I choose, and I understood the weight of that, and I had this rough translation. I thought a traditional text demands a traditional study form, which is chavruta, which is partner study, and around then, Baruch, I hadn't seen him in years, walked into the coffee shop, and I said, I've been waiting for you. And I asked him if he'd be involved, and he's such a deep part of this book. But literally, just whole days going by where we'd argue a word, half a line, a phrase. Look at it now and back through Haggadahs for 1,000 years and back to the Torah and what does the Gemara say. I really wanted to say, we're on a university, rabbis, professor, I just feel like stumped the band. Like we wrestled every word of this. I just felt like I couldn't do this project unless I felt I had literally understood it, everything to the very best of my capacity.
Jonathan, you mentioned that there were about 30 people who were originally going to be involved in the project. And on the Little Brown website, there's still a list. It's not 30, but it's a list of some of the original people. And the only one who is still standing or still sitting, included, is Daniel Handler, or Lemony Snicket, as he's listed there. So
I beat them all.
You beat them all. What did you think, Daniel, when Jonathan contacted you about doing a Haggadah?
Well, he contacted me when I was one of 30 or something, and it felt like a very small idea. It felt like an anthology. It felt I got the 10 Commandments, which seems like the 10 plagues. I always confuse those. Yeah. Is it adultery or frogs? I can't remember. I had a whole train of thought that went from there, and I'm cutting it off just at the root. And he said, why don't you do something about the 10 plagues? And I did a little piece about the 10 plagues, because what I was interested in with the 10 plagues, what I was always interested in, was the idea of plagues loosed on a population that maybe didn't agree with its leadership. Perhaps all of you here in Northern California at Stanford might imagine a scenario in which you lived in America and didn't agree with its leadership. Just imagine for a moment what that would be like. And I was interested in that piece of it, and I wrote a piece that was as much as I could from the point of view of Egyptians who are saying, let them go already. Like, now we got locusts? What's going on? Enough. And how futile it would be to try and kind of protest the Pharaoh when there's plagues going on. It just seems, what sign could you hold that would convince the Pharaoh when already water has turned to blood? It just seems, and I was interested in that. But in the back of my head, I thought, I wonder how this is fitting in with the other 30 people, with what Tony Kushner is going to say about the Afikoman. And I don't participate in anthologies very much for kind of that reason, that when you're in an anthology, I always feel as if like you're kind of standing behind each piece in it, but you don't get to see the pieces until they come out. And then sometimes you get your copy and you're in an anthology, you think like, that's schmo, what am I doing there? And so I was tentative about the piece, but I thought, good for the Jews. So I did it, and then some years passed, and he called me, which is always great when you turn in a piece and then some years pass before you hear. You think, I bet they love it so much that they're busy composing such a wonderful ode to your skill that it's taking a long time. That's what I assume anyway. And then he called me back, and it was almost like he solved the problem. He said, it's not going to be this anthology anymore. It's going to be very few people, and these are the moments that are going in, and everyone's thinking about it this way. And so everyone's going to be talking about the same moments, and everyone's commentary is thus both overlapping and not overlapping. It's both separate takes on the same moment. And that seemed much more exciting to me. And I think that it follows a kind of a format where when Jonathan first had the idea and Nathan first started translating and when the commentators started doing their shtick, that it seemed something in the range of a lark or an experiment, and then we all, as we dove in, began to realize what a serious undertaking it was. And so with that, I began to think about, as I was unsurprisingly given the task of commentary for young people, I began to think about the young person's, my own youthful experiences of Seders and the young people of what I knew and what the questions that came to mind and how we could grapple with those questions. And those questions are enormous, but they're in the mind of a child. And they're not smaller questions. It's the whole thing of children's literature relation to literature, is that it is a way of telling a story, but the stories aren't smaller. And that was my task.
Could you give us a taste of your commentary by reading?
I believe there happens to be a copy here. Yeah,
or this one.
I think I know, yeah.
Yeah, you know which one it is.
Nathan really helped me because before going on stage, we looked at what page it was. We didn't have anywhere to mark it.
This one is marked if you want to use this one.
Well, it's on page 30, but Nathan gave me this helpful mnemonic. He said, I have a mnemonic for you. It's 6 times 5. That's the kind of, yeah.
He's like that, you know?
You know, it's true. There's not a lot of authors who give in that way.
Yeah.
You know, like Alice Munro would be like, remember it yourself. I'm not,
Right.
Yeah. That's not true. All right. This is a commentary on the 4 sons. Some scholars believe there are 4 kinds of parents as well. The wise parent is an utter bore. Listen closely, because you're younger than I am, says the wise parent, and I will go on and on about Jewish history, based on some foggy memories of my own religious upbringing, as well as an article in a Jewish journal I have recently skimmed.
Would you read yours on this?
The wise parent must be faced with a small smile of dim interest. The wicked parent tries to cram the story of our liberation into a set of narrow opinions about the world. The Lord led us out of Egypt, the wicked parent says, which is why I support a bloodthirsty foreign policy. And I'm tired of certain types of people causing problems. The wicked parent should be told in a firm voice, with a strong hand, God rescued the Jews from bondage, but it was my own clumsy hand that spilled hot soup in your lap. The simple parent does not grasp the concept of freedom. There will be no macaroons until you eat all of your brisket, says the simple parent at a dinner honoring the liberation of oppressed peoples. Also, stop slouching at the table. In answer to such statements, the wise child will roll his eyes in the direction of the ceiling and declare, "Let my people go." The parent who is unable to inquire has had too much wine and should be excused from the table.
I thought it'd be nice maybe if Nathaniel read his commentary on the 4 sons, because it'll give a sense of how the book works, what the range of the commentaries are, and also I think the fullness of the text that's being referred to. You want this one?
Yeah, sure.
So just, I don't know if we even introduced what the structure of the book is, but there are 4 different voices at play for each of these moments. One is Daniel's, which is called Playground.
Playground.
One is Nathaniel's, which is House of Study, and it's a more traditional rabbinic, Jewish philosophical kind of commentary. Then there's Nation by Jeffrey Goldberg, the Atlantic magazine correspondent. And that's sort of asks, what questions should Jews as a people, political questions, nationhood questions should we be asking about this moment in the story? And then Rebecca Neuberger-Goldstein, who wrote what we call the library commentary, and that's literary, psychological, why are the characters acting in these particular ways in this moment?
5 times 6, is that?
5 times
Yeah, 5
6.
times 6.
It
okay.
works.
So easy.
It's great. Okay, so. And Moses took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will hear. Exodus 24:7. Tonight we celebrate the liberation of our ancestors from slavery in Egypt. But does liberation mean freedom? Of course we say. After all, the Haggadah itself declares, quote, he took us from slavery to freedom, from sorrow to joy, and from mourning to festivity, and from deep darkness to great light, and from bondage to redemption. But nothing is simple in Torah. According to the book of Exodus, when the Torah was given at Sinai, the Israelites accepted its commandments without first hearing what they would be. Thus they declared, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. But even the simple son of the Haggadah asks, what is this, when presented with the story of the Exodus? Were the Israelites at Sinai so naive that they were like the son who does not even know how to ask? Or did they knowingly decide to take a leap of faith and exchange the yoke of slavery in Egypt for what the rabbis call the yoke of heaven, no questions asked? And in so doing, did they give up the freedom that they had just acquired in leaving Egypt? The wicked son of the Haggadah believes in freedom, and so many of us are drawn to him. Freedom for the wicked son means denying that the laws of the Torah affirmed by the wise son apply to him. But that is not all. The wicked son also denies that he is a member of the Jewish community, what the rabbis call Klal Yisrael. By asserting his individual freedom, the Haggadah declares the wicked son has exempted himself from the liberation from Egypt. Quote, if he had been there, he would not have been redeemed. Here it appears we have freedom without liberation. But does this also mean that the Torah believes in liberation without freedom? So in addition to the translation and to the commentary, the graphics of the Haggadah are really an important part of it, an integral part. So we have the cover here, but I want to show a few images, and maybe, Jonathan, you could talk about that part of the process, how we came to this.
I'll tell you what's up.
Yeah.
Whoa, it's me.
Sorry about that. So this is, you can see up there the timeline and the original text and the translation. And then here, this is Manishtana. And this is, I think, Bechol Dor Vador. This one is, it's hard for me to read that.
In a chad.
Okay, yeah. And why don't we stop on this one, and maybe you could talk about...
So, you know, there are a number of components on each page. It's a very complicated book to design because, if it's bilingual, you know, because you suddenly have the Hebrew text, the English text, the directions, you know, what one is supposed to be doing at any given moment, some kind of visual embellishment. We also had, and then to distinguish between different kinds of text, you know, prayer or a story or a song, and then we had this timeline running graphically across the tops of the pages, which contextualizes the story of the Exodus, basically, how it's appeared throughout Jewish history and appeared throughout world history. So in the beginning, when I was approaching all of these potential contributors, I approached a number of visual artists as well, and I thought, again, oh, let's just get really beautiful art and we'll make a really beautiful Haggadah. But then I started to back away from that. My instinct was that that wasn't going to work. It would be very hard to make a unified document. So to my knowledge, this is the only visually embellished Haggadah that has no figurative art. It's all language-based. There are some really, really beautiful Haggadahs in existence. One of my favorites is the Ben Shon Haggadah. I don't know how many people know that one. It's just absolutely beautiful. But I'm not sure it succeeds as a Haggadah because it is the Ben Shon Haggadah as opposed to a Haggadah that was illustrated by Ben Shon or that has his imprint. It is too closely associated with him to create the room that's necessary for a reader. You know, how do you feel like you are a character inside of the Ben Shon Haggadah? It's very difficult. So I started to think about how can we make something that's beautiful, that creates a kind of visual narrative, but lacks that heavy hand of an artist's sensibility. and doesn't constrain the imagination also. I hate novels that have photographs on the cover because it's very hard to imagine your own version of the character once you've seen an image that we can't help but think is a representation of the character. It's also why I have a hard time with audiobooks. Once you hear a voice, it's very hard to create your own voice. And really the magic of a novel is the reader's creation, the reader's participation. Kurt Vonnegut said that a book is to a reader as a piece of sheet music is to an orchestra. And the Haggadah is the most extreme version of that. It is useless without participation. So how do you create visuals that encourage that kind of participation? I found this guy, Oded Ezer. He's an Israeli typographer, but he has a real international reputation. His work is in MoMA, museums all over the place. Very, very, very celebrated artist. And I thought maybe this is an answer. I didn't quite know how, but maybe moving away from figuration toward a text-based art. And then he had the idea, which he first created a number of spreads for the book. I shared them with Nathan. I can't remember if I shared them with you at the time. That were
They were devastating.
absolutely
They were so
beautiful. Gorgeous. These great visual embellishments where he would take a page of the Haggadah, then cut letters with an X-Acto knife and peel them up, and he would reveal other texts beneath, take a photograph of that. And they were incredible, but again, they weren't really contributing meaning. They weren't creating space. They weren't contextualizing the book. And so we said, let's go back to the drawing board. And then he came up with this idea, and it was really like a stroke of genius. He just had it in an instant. He said, what if we followed the timeline? So, I can't even see what the year is up there, but whatever year it is.
1623, I think.
1623. So what did
World's Fair.
what did Hebrew lettering look like in that moment in Jewish history? And he hit the books. I would say 9/10 of the time he spent designing this book were research. What did Hebrew handwriting look like in that period? What did, if there was Hebrew type at that point, what did that look like? And he used that as the basis for the design of each spread, so that the book becomes a kind of living record of Hebrew lettering, which is it's a kind of thrilling idea conceptually, but it also makes a really exciting visual experience because it's constantly changing. It like creates its own sense of suspense. What is the next bit going to look like?
So this next question is for all of you, and you're all involved in different projects. You have a play that's going to be coming out next year, right? Kind of TV thing. Daniel, you have a new Lemony Snicket series coming out, and yeah. So my question is, how did working on the Haggadah impact or interact with the other kinds of work that you're doing? And do you anticipate it maybe changing the way you approach projects in the future?
I can scream about that without, it honestly, I feel like my new collection, I feel like is a product of this work. It actually changed the way I think. It's just, again, my only writing advice also, I always feel like, it's nice guys, finish nice gals, girls, third sex, you name it. But the point is, doing the right thing when you're working on writing is always the right thing. When you do a favor for a friend or say like, oh, is this, it always helps you. You read someone else's story, you learn to read. And this idea of, Jonathan, bringing this project to me and me getting involved and knowing this is going to take me away from my other work, and I had no idea how much time it was going to take, but I can't even tell you what it was to work with language this way, to work at a sentence level this way, to think of meaning this way. I just can't even, my brains explode. It's like when I lived in Israel for a bunch of years, but I remember living there learning Hebrew, like modern Hebrew that way, where suddenly, you'd learn the Hebrew like, mechonat kfisa, and you'd be like, washing machine, I never thought about it. It's the machine which washes. Like language starts to crack open. But then when you work at this level, it's biblical. Think about that. If I asked you to translate, give me another word in English for water that has all the meaning of water. It's not liquid or a life. It's, I'm saying this is to think on that way and to be all consumed in something. I'm not a translator. I didn't identify it really. honestly, in the most basic philosophical level, made me think of who I am, how I identify. Here I was translating or playwriting, being like, I'm not a playwright, I'm not a translator, just consumed with project in this way, without identity, obligation to text, and even to recognize, if you ask me about short stories, I'll be like, that is the supreme form. There is no form more important, more perfect, constructed wholly in the brain than the short story. And now I see, you ask me like, Trent, there is nothing more challenging than, live theater is the greatest artistic, and I wasn't being in conflict, I just understood what it means, like what passion is, what commitment is, what identity is, and it just so made me, even just ownership of material, back to that idea for me, I may not be religious now, I was very religious then, the idea of taking a word from the Torah, from the Bible, and me saying this is what this means, like the weight of that, it was, crippling at first. That's the idea of me feeling one must learn everything one can learn, and then, but just being forced to commit to those words made me think about what it is to commit to any word. And again, this book that I wrote last year would have taken me 20 years. It changed my whole way I see art and language, and I'm super thankful for it.
But what else did it do?
Exactly. My bunions went away.
Yeah. You should have gone last. 'Cause then it was less explosive for me, but also writing commentary was not a project of many years. But it actually provided a whole platform for me. This new series that will begin in the fall was simmering with me for a very long time, and I knew some things about it, but I didn't grasp the structure of it and the format of it. And it wasn't until looking through my own Haggadah, as well as some of the texts that Jonathan sent me to start to do this, that it hit me. And even though I didn't write any commentary about the 4 questions, the new series is in the form of 4 questions. It's called All the Wrong Questions, and each volume is a question. And the idea of trying to ask the right question that will produce the answer that will illuminate the situation that you're looking at is the journey of childhood, right? It's learning what question to ask that will get the response you are desiring, but if you don't know the response you're desiring, you're always going to be asking the wrong questions. I mean, it's hopelessly abstract, but the new series, in a series of unfortunate events, Lemony Snicket is a grown-up, and he's thinking about things that have happened a long time ago, and this is a more immediate journey. It's Lemony Snicket's childhood, and it's what he's learning when he's learning how to be an adult and learning how to be the mysterious person that he becomes. And thinking about, I mean, there were many other things that fed this, but thinking about questions was really powerful for me to figure out. And my sister, who's been a lifelong companion and joy for me, but certainly at all Jewish holidays, she and I were always giggling in the back. And we always had jokes about the 4 questions. Like, really, out of all the questions you would ask, that's the one. Like, why on all nights do we either dip or not dip, and this time we have to dip? Like, that's what's unusual about the Seder? Like, matzah, okay. And even the translation we always had of the first question was, on all our other nights we eat leavened or unleavened bread. And we said, like, unleavened? You never eat unleavened bread. The whole question is ridiculous. Like, the question really is, like, why can't I have a baguette right on the side of this soup? It would be so perfect. And to say it's because we want you to think about suffering while you're having a delicious meal, right? And that if there's nothing but, if you only learn one thing while you got a Jewish education, to say, because we want you to think about suffering while eating well, right? That's Jewish culture in a nutshell. And yeah, and so that question actually produces the answer that teaches the child where he is in the world, which is constantly eating and suffering.
Okay, it's your turn, Jonathan. You
Yeah.
Those were two very good answers. I was just grateful for what I learned in the process. I mean, I read an enormous amount, and the nature of my reading changed. You know, I just didn't read many Jewish books. I mean, I read a lot of Jewish literature, but not works of Jewish history or Jewish philosophy. And in preparing for this book, I read a lot, and you know, it's like the library at my house changed really dramatically, and I'm grateful for that. And I have to imagine. I mean, it comes up constantly in my decision-making process. I don't just mean how I raise my kids, but you know, how I think about time, how I like to divide time. I think ethical questions that I wonder about. But I've also found it really just intellectually gratifying, maybe even more than I had ever found books to be.
I mean, for me, it was a real gift to participate in the process. I did it really for two reasons. One, because you were so serious about it. I mean, I could tell that it was an important project for you. And two, because it's not every day that someone asks you to participate in the Haggadah. And when I thought about that, I mean, it's a real legacy and a responsibility. And as a professor, I often have to read lots of stuff and put together all sorts of sources from different places. But it was a matter of years, really, to meditate on 10 different moments. And I'd find myself doing it at different times, just walking, going for a run, or sitting, whatever it was. And that was a really incredible experience to me. So I want to have time for questions. Maybe, Nathan, you can lead us into the question and answer period by reading something else from the Haggadah.
Sure. Well, if it's the end, I should read from the end. There's always questions about the translation, but it's so hyper literal I cannot even tell you like the obligation I feel to text. But certain things, you know, back to we'll make a big circle of the evening, but and if we're making a circle of the evening, this is such a lovely night, and thank you for that. Those introductions take 900 hours to write. Thank you for that. But just this idea of, you know, every choice is decision. You know, there's a lot of different people in this world. Like, what does this word mean? You know, are we doing rhythm? Are we doing, you know, and it has to contain all of them. That's the point if you're a compulsive, as all of us up on this stage are. Like, it's compulsive, you know, the work that you have to do, it's overwhelming, but it has to have the rhythm and the meaning and the word. You know, it's all this stuff has to be in there, and the reference points and the echoes. And if it echoes this way in Hebrew, how does it echo this way in English? You know, it's endless, this, you know, multi-dimensional thing. I have to use both hands to wave to what you're holding in your head when you choose a word. But sometimes, you know, back to the idea of, like, we talk about Manish Tana, like, it's the 4 questions are probably the most accessible, straightest, because those are for kids, so they need to be straight and clear that way. But this is a song at the end, and it's maybe the one freestyling thing in the whole book, because this song is so much about rhythm and about that rhythm, and the rhythm to me was lost when I thought about it in English. So again, this is probably it's still very close to the Hebrew, but in terms of obsessive, you know, exactitude of loyalty, the loyalty in this song is in the rhythm. So it's the Who Knows One song. And I won't sing it, but I'll do 12 for you. 12, 12, who knows 12? 12, 12, I know 12. Anyway, 12 are the tribes, 1 each for Jacob's son, and 11 are the stars minus Joseph's 1, and 10 are the commandments, God's will be done, and 9 moons cycle before the baby comes, and 8 is the day on which the Brit is done, and 7 days pass with the setting of the Sabbath sun, and 6 are the parts of the Mishnah, and 5 are the books of the Torah, and 4 are the mothers whence we come, and 3 are the fathers, Abraham first among, and 2 are the tablets of our bond, and 1 is Hashem in the heavens and the earth. Ooh, ah.
All right, so there are 2 microphones
Funny to
here,
applaud after Hashem.
and people
Yay, Hashem.
are invited to make lines behind the microphones. If you have any questions, now's the time.
You want it?
Yeah, you're first.
Go ahead.
What did you do with the other 29 commentaries that were submitted?
No, it's not all 29 were submitted. Those are people who I was in conversation with, thinking about what they might do. in terms of pieces that were submitted, there were maybe half of that. What did I do? I paid kill fees. That's what I did. The kill fees for the book were greater than the fees for submitted material. There was just so much that didn't go in. But, and some of it is just really, really wonderful. So I hope there would be some way to use it. I think some of them, are finding ways to publish them elsewhere.
Thank you so much for this evening. My face hurts. I've been smiling so much. Tell us about the title, why you called it the New American Haggadah.
Well, I would have preferred to call it nothing, really. I mean, I don't, it's because a title, I mean.
Ask for it by name.
Yeah. The title constrains the book. It can't help but overlay or suggest the overlay of an agenda or a particular intended audience. So, there's a tradition of naming Haggadot after where they were made or where they ended up. And that was really what I went to. Just what is a relatively open, accessible, kind of bland, actually, name that we could give it. I don't think it's particularly American, or that it wouldn't work for somebody who isn't American. Although, as it turns out, all of the commentators were American, and Jeffrey Goldberg is the only one I think who actually appeals to American history. But I hope the title doesn't take up too much space in one's thinking of the book.
And I love its place in time. Like, there's something, I don't know, I love the idea of New America. Like, it's humbled to me in that way. Because it will be the old new, I think of the Alt New Schule in Prague, like the old new, when they build the new. I like that it's already, the Haggadah that will come out tomorrow makes this the old new. It's just of a time, and I love it's, we're at the most forward moment in history at any given moment, and I kind of like that word there for some reason.
And I liked when I learned the title and I took all my files on the computer and put them in a folder that I called it by its initials, which is generally what I do with a book, and so then it spells nah, which I liked because that felt like, do we want to be slaves anymore? Nah. Are we almost in Israel? Nah. Are we going to follow all these things on the... No.
I was wondering if you could comment on your opinion about the use of humor in this Haggadah. At least it seems that there's been a lot of humor in our discussion. I was wondering how much of that comes through in the text, and most Haggadot obviously aren't humorous. So I was just wondering, where did you find that coming from, and what do you think is its place?
Tonight is not representative of the book.
I just crashed.
I was going to say, writers usually work in the opposite. I feel like the happier on stage, the more dark and disturbed is the private time. That's my feeling.
Daniel's commentaries are very funny, but they're the only ones that are trying to be funny. And any other humor you find is accidental.
Yeah.
It's not a funny document. I mean,
there
are
see,
things...
I would dispute that.
Yeah.
But I would dispute that other Haggadot are not funny, because I wish my sister were here, and then we would both be giggling about them. And that actually, the reason why there's humor in my commentary is that I feel there's inherently humor in the text. So just as I riffed on the 4 questions, I think the story of Exodus is a story of prolonged suffering, and reading about prolonged suffering eventually gets silly, just as reading prolonged silliness, eventually you're suffering. And that seems also to be very Jewish.
In terms of the translation, you talked about your sense of loyalty and obligation to the original Hebrew, but I wondered if there was discussion about the gendered language.
Yeah, there was endless discussion about everything. And this is such a specific time in America because I can't believe it's my lifetime where, one state wants to pass a law where women have to be raped to if they want to make a choice about having a baby, or, people, give me your IUD. It's literally, I wasn't alive for McCarthyism, but it's literally madness of what is being lost now and what has become normal speech. Like the bar gets so lowered, it's actually terrifying. But the idea is, it's always about choices. No, it's about this falling away. Like, this is not, I did this translation, but it's this idea, if this was a Hasidic audience, and they'd be like, why is there no machitza in this room? Women shouldn't be, I worked so hard for it to be for everyone, but that's not the point. And there's plenty, I don't know how many say in the Hebrew, hineni muchan and muchana, where there's the masculine and feminine, or matei ma'at, where I say, a small group instead of a few, but it's not about defense. My point is, my politics, my girlfriend, who is so crazy fucking smart, somebody brought this up last night, and I felt like a deer in the headlights and was totally rattled by this notion of like gender. I thought about this endlessly, and I said, but I have no agenda. It's not reform. It's not, there's God-free Haggadahs, there's, LGBT and alcoholics, and it's every group has a Haggadah, for themselves, which is beautiful. That's the whole idea of a living text. But I said to her, I didn't even know what to say. I was so alarmed by that question. And I said, but I don't have an agenda. And she said, you do have an agenda. Your agenda is the text. And my point is, where someone said, well, it should say, next to Abraham, it should also say Sarah. But, I'm like, so in Moses at the burning, do I put Yocheved, his wife? It was such an interesting, no, in serious, considering that idea. And I thought about the text. If you're learning me personally, we don't agree with any part of this text. And it's interesting, I felt that idea. I was really defensive about it. But it was that idea where it's I want Hasidic people to be able to use it, and Reform and Reconstructionists, and the idea is just it being a Jewish document. I'm a really universal person. Maybe we should remove any reference to this idea of freedom. It's for everyone. I want everyone to be free. So maybe I should remove any specific. It's sort of in its own way like a closed book. That's a very fair discussion. Why not remove any reference to the Jew? It should just be the people were freed and not the why not do that? And I thought about it, and it's really just, yes, I don't agree personally with any part of this book. None of us do, I think, or you're not anyone I would like if you want. What I'm saying? Like Santorum in his fucking sweater vest. I don't want to live in a fascist, I don't want to live in a theo-fascist state where one religion, as a Jew, this idea of no separation of church and state does not mean that I'm going to be protected as a person of faith. It means one religion. There's no room for anyone else in that kind of state. Any religious state is one religion on all these fronts. My point is, the killing of the firstborn is brutal and murderous, and it is a cruel, cruel God. There was someone who was just one step above a Jewish slave who was somewhere in the Nile Delta who'd never even met a Jew. That firstborn was slaughtered. That is ruthless. I would never, kill a child. And all of us who say next year in Jerusalem, anyone who is Jewish in here, Israel, there should never be a second American Seder. When I lived in Israel, we had one Seder. There should never be Israel will buy you a ticket and help you with Aliyah and put you on an Ulpan and pay for your apartment and really help you. The idea to say we translate all these things, it's an ancient text, and the idea is we put it in context. So when we say next year in Jerusalem, you're lying. If you actually believe that line, then you need to be in Jerusalem next year. I can help you get there. But, but my point is you're putting it in context. And in that same way, I don't understand, it's not for me to color or qualify or change. If it says king, I did not feel comfortable saying queen. I believe, I watched my mother slave. We all sat, I still have calluses sat on our fat asses. The men, we did not lift a finger. That is not the house that I will have. And it was they worked hard. Those were choices that were made. That's not who I am. But the point is, it is not for me. About taking ownership is not for me to edit. It would be a different book, I tell you that.
For a different question, the Haggadah itself seems uneven. There are times when it operates at one level, and all of a sudden it does a deep dive into some other level, like when the rabbis talk about how many plagues and do the calculus of the plagues. We get up to 250. And were there places where you felt we ought to skip this, or we ought to tread, or just not deal with it? Or did you feel the same responsibility at sort of all levels, at all elements of the Haggadah? Or did you cut anything?
It's not a long book, actually. I mean, this book appears much bigger than it is because of the way that it's designed. It gives a lot of there's a lot of breathing room for words. So I have sympathy with people who skim, because that's what we did when I was growing up. But the notion of altering the text was something we never discussed.
Hi. So, I was just looking at the Haggadah and our copy, and it's really cool. And I was just wondering a few things about the format, because it's really different from all the other Haggadahs I've read, and like even the Haggadahs that have footnotes or art in them, it looks really different. So I was wondering about two things. I was wondering about the timeline at the top, and then also the blank pages that you have in the back for personalizing. I was just like wondering how you came up with those and why you chose certain events and such.
So the timeline is like the story of the story. This is, how Jews have celebrated Passover at various points in history, how many Jews there were, where Jews were, how the story was told, famous Haggadot, and as I said, how other cultures have borrowed the story. And the timeline, which begins in the beginning of the book, continues graphically past the last date. This was a big, a big problem. Like, what would be the last date on such a timeline? There isn't a last date. That's the point.
Not yet.
Right. The fact of celebrating it, of being there, reading the book, suggests there's no last date. And so I had heard from a number of people, actually, that about family traditions of writing on the back cover of the book or inside cover, your name, the place, and maybe a memory or two. And I just loved that idea. I loved the idea of the book becoming a record of its use. Imagine how special that would be in 10 years, 20 years. Imagine, when the people who sign their names aren't around anymore, how grateful you'd be to have that. So we have the timeline extend into that. That's why the pages are blank. It gives room for people to, include themselves.
Why do you consider eating matzah for 8 days to be suffering?
Are you the matzah lobby? Who are you?
It's yummy.
Yeah, it's Bob Straight.
Exactly. It's Manny Shevitz.
Have you had matzah?
With a little gefilte fish and grain, it's great.
What? Sorry?
Gefilte fish and grain or chili powder or pickle, it's great.
Just the idea that the recipe begins with how can we improve upon the thing, I think would be that. It's stone soup, right? It's like stone soup is delicious as soon as you've made minestrone and the stone is in the bottom of it. But I actually don't even think it's just the experience of eating it. I think it's also the experience, and here is where we're circling around ideas of gendered families and some people who may not be involved in the cleaning of a house, but the matzah crumbs are there. You can't. They never leave. They're like the needles of the Christmas tree. In a way, it's that parallel that you hope that they're gone by the time they start again.
So you mentioned the art, but can you talk about the typography of the actual text? Does that also change during the text, or is there one font? And if so, how did you decide what to use?
No, it's one font consistently throughout, and Oded invented it. I'm pretty sure he invents type. That's what he does actually for a living. In addition to being a graphic designer and an illustrator, he also invents type. And it was a challenge how to make the pages dynamic while also clear. And in the Hebrew, he modified the font size within sentences, and I think it takes on a really lyrical, almost flowing appearance.
He's the guy, I think he's working on the font, what's going to be the like Hebrew font for the internet in the digital age. He's like Stevie Garamond. Like he's,
Yeah.
Okay, let's have two more
Geneva.
questions.
exactly.
This is
Jimmy
a
needs
two-part
to
question. In terms of the translation, how would you say that the music was internalized during the act of translation? And the second part is, do you have a good tune for Halach Manya?
I have the classic Halach Ma'anya tune, which is, I was going to say, probably as old as the Aramaic. But I sure ain't going to sing it, but it's the one you know. And yeah, the music, I mean, that's just, it's almost not even answerable because it's just part of my head in a sense. Like I write to rhythm. I had to work really hard when I read fiction publicly not to sing it. People always come up to me and I turn purple and they're like, it's like you're reading the Torah. It's like I always work to rhythm. So in a sense, it was a really strange, wonderful challenge to want to fight for these rhythms really hard that are in the Hebrew while, it's this giant puzzle. And it's all about rhythm to me. But again, it's this weird game, nothing can suffer. The game is called, we always suffer. My suffering was that nothing can suffer. So you can't lose rhythm, and you can't lose meaning, and you can't lose clarity, and you can't lose exactitude, and so it's all in there. But yes, it's all to rhythm for me in everything.
I have a somewhat irrelevant question to ask you.
What a great way to end an evening.
You said that your work was based on the first printed Haggadah that you were able to identify. And I'm just wondering that if you're considering an iPad version of this.
That's an awesome question.
I don't know. Do you think people would have them at the table? I hope not. I really hope not. I mean, maybe as a reference tool, it could be sort of interesting. And, I think that a lot of iPad versions of books are much more interesting to talk about than they actually are in existence. It's a little like the guitar solo problem. Like, they're fun to play, but they're not fun to listen to. And, is it possible to imagine? Sure, but so much of this book is about its materiality, thinking about how it would be used. We give a lot of thought to that it would open flat, just like this. Because very few do, actually. And so what are you supposed to do with, if you're eating a meal and you're gesticulating, and how are you supposed to lose one of your hands to hold a book? And give a lot of thought to what the size should be, what the thickness of the paper should be, how glossy or matte it should be. Because all of these things influence the experience. And, in the end, that is what we were doing, was trying to create, the metaphor I often use is tuning an instrument. Like, what are the decisions that are available to us? What are the choices available to us? And how can they influence the experience so that it makes us feel like we ourselves were liberated from Egypt? And I find it hard to imagine how an iPad version could do that well.
Okay,
Thank you.
So there's going to be a book signing on the third floor, but it'll take a few minutes for the authors to make their way up there.
If you want to exit, you can exit on the right on this side, and then our guest will exit on the left. So please, that way.